I was with my wife. All of a sudden, we're going around this turn, and I just lose control of the truck. It starts slipping, and around this corner is coming this car, and we're going this way, and I am slipping into the oncoming traffic.
This is Stephen Howard with Faith Fuel, where we fuel your faith in Jesus. Thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast. Today, I've got a really, really good friend of mine, a spiritual friend who we've been friends for many, many years. He's personally taught me how to play guitar, and we've just been real good friends for many years. And he's got a powerful story that I believe a lot of us can be really impacted with in our faith journeys, especially in growing our faith in God and having that resilience to push through. He has his own YouTube channel. He's definitely out there. He's impacted a lot of people with just his videos, his teachings, his music classes, etc. So, with all that being said, nice to everybody. Here's Josh Vigran.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's been quite a while since we've been together. You had this crazy journey where you moved to Fairbanks, Alaska.
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
people they have that funny situation where they're like, "How's the weather down there?" Now I seriously have to ask you because it's so different than where I am.
Yeah. Well, I moved up from DFW, Texas, where it's warm and muggy, and now it's cold, and I'm subarctic basically.
Oh
Actually,
man.
right now it's been really good temperatures. Right now it's a little bit cold, but it's I say good. It's been about 40 degrees, so it's melting. It's springtime here.
Oh, well, 40 degrees in springtime. That doesn't make much sense here, but hey, it makes sense there, right?
That's
Well,
what it's like here.
a couple, it was about was it in August or October of last year, you kind of decided to start heading to Fairbanks. And it was kind of this on the whim. God had told you, he'd been telling you for a long time. You'd been having dreams, if I was correct. Can you share some of those, kind of what God was showing you?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story because the question that people ask every time I meet them in a place like Fairbanks, it's the second largest city in Alaska, but that is by Alaska standards. The city itself is maybe 40,000 people. The whole metro area is about 100,000. So the main question that people ask when they find out you're not from there is what brought you to Alaska? Because everybody has a story, and I always give sort of a very truncated version because the answer is a little bit strange. And yeah, you're right. It did have to do with dreams that the Lord gave me. I actually had over 20 dreams in about a 3-month time span
That's
about
crazy.
moving to Alaska. And mind you, I had never planned on moving to Alaska before. It was not on my radar. I never talked to anybody about it. It started yeah, in the near the end of 2023. Yeah, right around then.
Yeah. And I remember you telling me about these dreams and back then it was like such a we had no idea what was going to happen. You had no idea what was going to happen. It seemed so like out of the blue for God to show you these dreams about Fairbanks. It almost didn't even seem like it was reality or it was going to happen, right?
Yeah, for me, dreams have been a way that the Lord has spoken to me over the course of my life. So that in and of itself was nothing new. But what was new was the insistency. Like I said, over 20 dreams over the course of a few months. It was getting, ridiculous to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore.
100%. I remember you telling me about those and you're like, "What does it mean?" You know? Like
Yeah, well, what made it more confusing too is it started because I was applying for jobs, after the pandemic. Um, I graduated with my doctorate in music in 2020, and of course, I was looking for jobs. I was applying all over the place. I really had no idea, but I found this job in Fairbanks, Alaska, and um, I sent out maybe 30, 40 applications all across the US, and I made it to the final round of the University of Fairbanks job, and I didn't get the job. And when I didn't get the job, um, it was kind of a little bit, oh, well, I didn't really think much of it. It was a little bit, I was a little bummed out because I made it, to the second or third round in only about three interviews.
Dang.
And that was one of them. But then the dream started after I didn't get the job. And so I remember once, like after maybe about dream 15 or something, I woke up and I was actually like angry at I was upset and I remember I was like taking a shower and I said, God, why do I keep having these dreams? I didn't get the job. And I remember him saying very clearly, when did your dreams ever talk about the job?
Mm.
And that hit me so hard. I was like, oh. So I went through and they didn't mention anything about the job. It was just location.
Yeah.
It was about, in the dreams, there was a lot of details, more than we have time for today, but essentially it was um, about 10 of them were specifically Fairbanks, Alaska, but all of them indicated like a place with a lot of snow, with a lot of mountains and forests and rivers and stuff like that.
Which was
And a
definitely
lot of
not
them
Texas.
definitely not North Texas.
But I love what you said in that. It's a lot of the times in our faith journey, I've realized it with myself. We put what our plans are, or we try to interpret what God's saying when God
Absolutely.
has the full picture in store. Like you never would have imagined that everything that's happened the way it's happened, or how God's blessed you and built these relationships like He has, if it was based on your plan. And it's so cool to see what God's been doing, to get you there and then the friendships you've been making. Can you tell me a little bit more of that?
Yeah, well, actually, this ties in with one specific dream. Just to give one particular, more concrete example. In this dream, and I dreamt this actually. Uh, I think I dreamt this in 2020. So this was before even I had any concept of this. This is probably the very first one. But in the dream, I was going on this very, very long journey, and I had all of my belongings in this trailer, and I was driving and driving and driving, and eventually I got to this place, and it was very dark outside, and it was very cold outside, and I hear a knock at the door of this little trailer that I'm pulling, and it's this. When I open it, it's this minister, and she's wearing like robes, like minister's robes. It's white with like a yellow sash around it, and so I invite her in, and I say, "Where are we?" And she said, "Oh, we're in Holland, but it's very dark right now because we're very close to the Arctic Circle,
Mm,
and it's almost Christmas time." And I wondered why the word Holland, but I looked up the word Holland. What it actually means is forested land.
mm,
And it's interesting because what she was wearing in the dream was very similar to, I'm sitting in a Lutheran church right now where I'm now the music director of this Lutheran church. It's very similar to the garments that the ministers wear.
that's crazy.
And I'm very close to the Arctic Circle, and I joined this church in late October, right around the time we were getting ready for Christmas.
Mm,
So that's just like uh, blows my mind. The other dreams that you had mentioned about meeting people, a lot of the dreams, and I think this was one way that God was giving me kind of courage and my wife courage, is I kept dreaming that we had support, we had friends, we had
mm.
groups of friends, and I didn't know anybody here. But it's been amazing, like how the community has helped. We moved up when my wife was pregnant. We just had our first child in February last month. And
Mm.
so like to have that support of people was amazing. And that was also a part of the dreams just that God showed.
Well, and it was a complete leap of faith what you guys did. You went from a community that you had built, a church family that you had built. You had, students, classes here. You had a house here. And then God says, move to Alaska. And you're like, Alaska, huh? Like,
Yeah,
and then you
and
have a pregnant wife at that. Like, I couldn't imagine how much faith that took.
I had a pregnant wife and I did have one job that didn't pay that much. And I kept telling people because I didn't want to have this long conversation of, oh, why are you moving to Alaska? Well, you see, like I had these, I can't, when you're in a short passing conversation, you can't say all that. So I just said, I just, been praying about it and there's just better opportunities for us there. And I had to believe that. I had to believe that there were more work opportunities here. But it wasn't until I stepped out. And now I'm making over twice as much money here as I was there. I'm able to actually support my family. I could not have done that with the
Mm.
income I was making in Texas. I just couldn't have. And so I knew more than I've known anything that the Lord was calling us here. I just didn't know how it was going to work
Well, literally,
until
you
we were here.
sacrificed everything to go out. You didn't know anybody, you didn't have any connections. It was all on a whim, and God completely provided the home, the truck to get there, every single
Yeah,
thing that you would need.
yeah, it's crazy. Even the house that we're renting right now, it's such a good deal. Like it's probably half of what the normal rent is, and it's a really nice place. We love it there, and it's just everything that happened one by one is just God's being faithful. Not to say that it was easy. There've definitely been challenges, but every step of the way God has provided.
Amen. It's pretty hard to see. It's pretty hard to not see God's beauty and His grace when you look out the window and you get the beautiful view that you get to wake up to.
It's stunningly beautiful here. I mean, it's the most beautiful place I have ever lived. Absolutely, hands down,
That's amazing. Well, in
despite
Faith
the
Fuel,
cold winter.
yeah, Faith Fuel, our whole mission is fueling people's faith in Jesus. And, we all go through hard seasons. We all go through, changes in our lives. And, this whole season, how has it taught you to truly have faith in God and to trust in his steps, but also how to hear him and to know that he's directing you?
It's a good question. I mean, beyond just the dreams, and also I want to clarify this because I don't want people to think that, oh, I just had these dreams and I moved up here. No, like I did a lot of research. I made sure that I knew the place, that I was cold calling and talking to people, and that's so out of my comfort zone. But
When you
the
also
thing
checked
was,
with your pastors, your leadership, you made sure it
oh
checked with
yeah,
the word. You were
you
very
you
thorough.
yeah, you and Pastor Rick, you knew about this a year before anybody else knew about
Hmm.
this. Because I was getting prayer from it, but yeah, I was researching as much as I could, and those dreams were happening, but the doors were opening. And the thing was, after applying all over the country and even in Texas, like trying to build my studio, you saw over the years like how much work I put into that, and it wasn't growing.
You hit your roadblock. Pretty much,
It
you had hit the
yeah.
standstill.
Yeah, it was like I felt like I was pouring all this time and energy into it and getting nothing in return. And then as soon as I focused my attention, I mean, I was getting phone calls back like crazy in Alaska, which kind of blew my mind as a stranger from out of town. But the other thing is when I mentioned to people I was thinking of moving to Alaska, overwhelmingly people's response was just sort of shock and concern.
Yeah.
So a few people thought it was cool, thought it was a good idea, but most people would, their eyes would get big, like you're moving where? You're moving why? And so when you see that over and over and over, I mean that it's hard not to have that affect you, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, especially when you're listening to God, I think about Moses and, like what he was stepping into and, literally leading an entire people out of, literal like slavery at that point and the faith that it took to step out. Now, like now you're not freeing necessarily a people, but like what you're doing is you're going into this uncharted land. Like they were trying to find the promised land. They were trying to find where God was guiding them. And, a lot of people, they spend their whole lives circling around where God's leading them. But it takes, just like you, it took the faith to say, okay, God, you're leading me here. You listen to your pastors, you listen to your leadership, you prayed, you fasted over this, and then you trusted God with it. And it's crazy, how much faith that takes to literally sacrifice everything. You have a newborn baby like coming, and like everything's on the
Yeah,
line, and you had to lay it bare
it's
for God.
I think that's one thing about faith is, James says faith without works is dead. You don't really experience God intervening on your behalf until you take that step. And
Mm,
for me, it was like the steps of, okay, I'm selling my car. I'm, you know, we're listing our home, and trying to get a new renter in there, all this stuff and renovating it, like the concrete steps that it took, where it really hits you like, oh, this is real.
yeah.
Um, but that's when he pulled through because we didn't exactly know what we were doing.
I thought it was crazy. Literally, you went to Alaska, no job in tandem, no job on the line, and then you
Well,
arrived.
one job, but we're talking part-time pay trying to support a
And then
family.
how
It's
long
not
was
much.
it that God gave you where you currently are now, the music director position? How quick was that?
So the choir job that I got, it was maybe the second or third week of rehearsals, and I'm applying for everything. My wife thought she had a job at a local church, but that fell through. Um, and someone from the choir came up to me and they're like, "Hey, do you have a job at a church?" I'm like, "No, but I'm interested." And sure enough, it's where I am right now, Zion Lutheran Church in Fairbanks,
It's so
and just
crazy too. Like God gave you this job, but then also when your truck was having issues, God introduced you to a mechanic and a doctor
yeah,
and all this sorts of stuff. It's been crazy to see God literally making a way for you in this whole uncharted territory. It's pretty
yeah,
gnarly.
yeah. Just one other quick little dream that I found kind of cool is in one of my dreams, I was driving the highway number 1 to Fairbanks. But the problem is that there is no highway 1 to Fairbanks. It's like the highway number 2 and number 3 that go through it.
Mm.
Um, I didn't quite understand what that meant, but when I was getting ready to move, I bought this cargo trailer. I didn't even notice this until I had like done all the negotiations, brought the trailer, was loading stuff in, and then I close it up and I look at the trailer, and it has a sign on it, Interstate 1. So I was literally
Oh,
driving the Highway 1 to Fairbanks. Is another
oh.
like goosebumps moment for me. It's just kind of cool,
It's
how it all
so
works out.
powerful. Well, and this whole year, it's I know I from personal experience, being in your life and being a pastor for you for as long as I have been, I got to see you and you listening to God and learning how to hear His voice even more and more and more. And like honestly, like it's been such a transformative thing to see that. But then honestly, you shared a story with me recently about how you heard God's voice and it literally saved your whole family's lives. Can you elaborate on that a little bit to me?
Yeah, this was a, just a couple of weeks before my son was born. So we had a strange winter in Fairbanks. It's a mild winter in comparatively. And in January, typically the temperature never gets above freezing. That's the coldest month of the year. So, coldest I saw was -35. That's not uncommon. We had a few days where it got up to like almost 40. And the problem is, that everything was melting. It was very slippery. And so I was driving, we live in these hills. And I've got this, 4x4 truck, winter tires, and it was doing fine. I didn't feel anything slipping. And I was just driving. I was with my wife. All of a sudden, we're going around this turn, and I just lose control of the truck. It starts slipping, and around this corner is coming this car, and we're going this way, and I am slipping into the oncoming traffic. Um, it's not just one car too. There's like 3 cars in a row. Um, I've got this big F-350 in the back is full of wood, probably like 2,000 pounds of firewood in the back. And I'm like pumping the brakes, doing everything I can, to keep it from stopping, and it's not stopping. It's just completely slipping on the ice. Um, and it's one of those moments like right during the moment when I kind of knew I couldn't stop, I had this realization that I had to, because I was in four wheel, I had to gun it towards this snowbank. Like
Mm,
it's either I'm gonna slam headfirst into this oncoming car, or I'm gonna drive into this snowbank on the side of the road. And so I turned it and I just gunned it into the snowbank. We hit the snowbank. The truck spins 180. So we hit it, we spin 180, go into the road, hit it again, spin
mm,
another 180, and land, and we're stuck in the side of the
mm.
snowbank. And I remember being there, like stopped, and uh, look over. My wife's okay, and then I look and see this truck pulling up, and he stops on the side, he rolls down his window, and his eyes are so huge. He's like, "Are you okay?"
Well, and yeah,
And I actually,
I remember you sharing with me that like while you were in that moment, the Lord like spoke to you, and he was the one that told you directly, wasn't he? That to if you slam on the brakes, you will run into that car, but if you
yeah,
press the gas, you'll make it through, or you won't be harmed, right?
yeah, because I didn't know. It all happened too fast for me to even understand what was happening. So yeah, I think the Lord saved my life because I had that realization um like right at the last minute that I that was the way that I could not get into this terrible accident. Um
Mm.
and the funny part is I this guy pulls up and his eyes are so big. So I ask him, like, are you okay? Because he looks so freaked out. I get out of the car and it's so icy, I slip
Mm.
and I dislocate my left shoulder.
Oh man.
And so it's just like, I don't know. It just seemed like the enemy was just coming against us. Of course, like my wife is 8.5 months pregnant
Mm.
and miraculously we're completely fine. And the my truck wasn't even damaged. That's the craziest thing is, I hit it pretty hard because the guy who stopped and he said that looks pretty bad. I think
Mm.
I was probably going about 35, 40, um, and just completely slammed into this snowbank. And I mean, snow is soft, but it had just warmed up from being like negative 20, so it's pretty hard packed snow.
Yeah, like hitting a brick wall
And
to an extent.
yeah, and just not a single indication in the truck that anything happened.
That's
So yeah,
crazy. That's crazy that literally these last couple years have been a literal moment where you've been hearing God, you've been listening, you've been training yourself to hear God and to follow his steps. And then literally you come into this culmination where the enemy's after you guys. He's trying to take you out, and like in a normal circumstance, it could have very easily happened, but in that moment, because you have learned to hear God, you saved your whole entire family with God's help. That's crazy to me.
I
It blows my
do
mind.
remember I do remember praying like going out too because it was pretty bad conditions, pretty bad road conditions. Um, since then, I mean, I was driving below speed limit, but still, I should have been going much slower. It just, yeah, you live and learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, God saved my life that day, and He saved my wife's life, and like we didn't have a bruise, like
Mm.
not from the seatbelt or anything, and it slammed into it slammed so hard that all the wood in my truck, I had it ratchet strapped down with this tarp, all of it had bunched up like pretty much close to the glass, and
Uh,
that's another miracle that it didn't like smash the back glass of the truck.
and hit you guys or
um,
something, bruh.
yeah,
That's crazy.
I
So,
know.
kind of, with Faith Fuel's mission and everything that we kind of focus on, what would the guiding lesson, the thing that you've been learning, about your faith journey and the faithfulness of God in your life, what could be the staple thing that you would tell the audience, the people listening today, about, just your current walk with God, or what you encourage them in their walk with God to really focus on and, adhere God in?
It's a balance between knowing what God is telling you, uh, reading the word, praying about it, seeking wisdom, but also knowing when people, because people mean well and people give you all sorts of advice, and most people want the best for you, but a lot of people speak out of fear. And I just knew that when I was telling people about what I felt the Lord was leading me to, and the response I was getting was, the shock and concern and all of that, I just knew that that was coming from primarily um, a place of like fear and ignorance on the part of the people. And so it's hard because I wasn't wanting to be naive and I wasn't wanting to be just stubborn, but at the same time, I knew what the Lord was telling me. So I think if I didn't spend that much time in prayer and fasting and seeking the Lord and talking to my wife about it, that's the other thing is like um, at first when I told my wife, she kind of thought it was crazy. But then she began praying about it, and the Lord began speaking to her as well. So we were on the same page, and I think that's really important if you're married. But yeah, just knowing those things, and then of course the other thing is when you do begin to step out and you see the evidence of the Lord working, it's just like confirmation. Um, so I guess that's the main thing. Just don't let fear detract you from what the Lord is calling you to.
Mm, that's powerful. Guys, like, this is a huge, amazing lesson. Josh has literally went from comfortability, simplicity, everything seemed like, okay, like we shouldn't go there. Friends, family maybe spoke out of fear in regards to it. But that's the greatest thing is you're going to have things that God's going to tell you to walk in. You're going to have things that God's going to guide you in. But the thing is, just like Josh said, you can't allow others to dictate what your future or to guide your path. You have to surrender it to the Lord. He's the one that knows truly what's the best part for you. He knows where to best guide you. And just like Josh experienced, he literally, if you will listen to his voice, he will save your life. And he will guide you in such a profound way that you really, really, that you're being led in the proper way. Anything else that you'd like to share, Josh, before we kind of wrap it up?
I think the don't put God in a box. The he he works so far beyond what we could expect. And I thought that I kind of had an idea of what he was leading me to. Everything turned out so differently than I thought. And so just, trust him and see what he does in your life because it's far beyond what we can do in and of our own capacity.
Amen. Faith is the testing of tiny, tiny steps made in a big, big plan, right? And so,
Yeah.
guys, let's go out. Let's, thank you, Josh, for joining me today and being a part of this podcast. And, guys, definitely check out his YouTube channel. I'm definitely going to leave a link for that so you guys can check it out, especially if you're musically inclined. This guy's amazingly gifted in an instrument. God's given him an amazing talent for that. But, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Keep your faith alive and burning bright. And just remember to always, 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 when you're hearing the voice of God, to listen in, to test it with the word, and to keep moving despite your fears, despite the anxiety that may come, because God's plan is far better than anything you can come up with. All right, guys, have a blessed one. Be safe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.